saying from the start that there is very little that we can do as legislators or that the government can do to resolve a labor dispute between the employer and its unionized workforce. But we all know now, Mr. Speaker, that this issue and this lockout is much bigger than just a dispute between the employer and its unionized workforce. Mr. Speaker, we know that on December 24, 2005, the Stora Enso mill located in Point Tupper, Richmond County, was closed down for a regular shutdown. Once it became clear that the union had taken a strike vote, the company filed to lock out its employees. And then at that point, on January 26th of 2006, the lockout officially took place. Mr. Speaker, as a result of that, the unionized employees of Stora Enso have been locked out of their mill since that time. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you will appreciate the concern that this has placed on not only the employees, their families, but on the communities surrounding the Strait area and the impact it is already having on our economy. Mr. Speaker, let me talk to you a little bit about the impact that Stora has on the Strait economy. Stora Enso employs 650 people directly. It is estimated that they are also responsible for 2,400 spin-off jobs. Many of those jobs, I'm sure that my colleague from Victoria de Lakes will be speaking of when he has the opportunity to speak during this emergency debate. Mr. Speaker, Stora has $500 million in direct sales annually, both to their newsprint line and their super calendared line. One of the most important figures, Mr. Speaker, is that Stora is responsible for a payroll of $65 million annually in wages and benefits. Let me say that figure again. $65 million in wages and benefits is what right now is on the line with the lockout that is taking place in the future of this mill. Mr. Speaker, as well, Stora purchases 950,000 tons of wood annually. That's what it uses. My understanding is that almost half of that is purchased from private woodlot owners. And we can certainly appreciate the impact that that is having on those woodlot owners and the revenue it brings into them. Mr. Speaker, the problems that are being faced at Stora are not entirely problems that are not being seen by other pulp and paper mills in North America. We know that the Canadian dollar is very high. We know that the markets for newsprint have been on the decline. So, Mr. Speaker, those are problems that are being faced by mills throughout North America. And, Mr. Speaker, we have seen that a number of mills in New Brunswick, in Newfoundland, and even in Ontario and other provinces have shut down, and in Quebec, because of the decline in the pulp and paper industry. But, Mr. Speaker, it has become quite clear to us that Stora Enso and their Point Tupper mill has very specific issues and challenges that they are faced with that must be addressed. And, Mr. Speaker, this issue is not a new one for myself, for the member from Antigonish, for the member for Guysborough Port Hawkesbury, or for the member for Inverness, who now sits in the Premier's chair. A number of years ago, Stora brought together municipal representatives, provincial representatives, and explained to us exactly what their situation was. Mr. Speaker, at that time, Stora was being faced with challenges under power rates, under taxation, and under labor costs, which was making them uncompetitive. This government has had years to work with Stora to address some of the concerns that have been raised, and unfortunately, we find ourselves here today in a lockout with no government response or proposed solution to this situation. Mr. Speaker, let me walk you a bit through the timeline that we find ourselves here. The lockout took place on January 26th. On March 19th, there was a rally with over 1,000 people that came to show their support for Stora Enso's workforce that took place in Port Hawkesbury. I had the pleasure to be there. I had the pleasure to address the crowd, and I was also pleased, through my office, to provide the union with $500 to help and assist their workforce through this lockout. What was most distressing, Mr. Speaker, is that I was the only MLA from the Strait area that showed up. The Premier wasn't there, the member from Antigonish wasn't present, nor was the member from Guysborough, Sheet Harbour. Yet, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure I don't need to remind those three members of how important Stora is to their economies and their ridings, and how many of their constituents are dependent on Stora Enso for their livelihood. Yet unfortunately, they chose not to be there, not to show their support, not to be there with their constituents through such distressing times. Mr. Speaker, shortly after this, the Premier of the province, the MLA for Inverness, the new Premier, said he was going to remain neutral in this dispute, that there was no role for government to play. Shortly after that, Mr. Speaker, we watched the Minister of Economic Development, prior to going into a cabinet meeting, saying there is no pot of money for Stora. No pot of money. Then, Mr. Speaker, on April 28, the Premier was a guest speaker for the Chamber of Commerce, the Strait Chamber of Commerce in Port Hawkesbury, where at that point he stated that his government did have a role to play in bringing a resolution to the lockout at Stora. So, as I said earlier, another flip-flop, another change in position by this government. And then, Mr. Speaker, on May 2nd, we had the Minister of Economic Development and the Minister of Natural Resources come out and announce a $65 million deal for Stora on an issue regarding the purchasing of future woodlots that wasn't even on the radar screen for the government, that wasn't even on the radar screen for Stora. But, Mr. Speaker, what it was meant to do was a smokescreen to somehow convince the people of the Strait area, somehow give false hope to the workers that this would help bring an end to the lockout that was taking place at Stora. And, Mr. Speaker, allow me to quote the words from a Cape Breton Post article dated Thursday, May 4th, 2004, where Russ Waycott, the Stora Woodlands Vice President, said, "But the agreement alone isn't enough to prompt Stora to restart the paper machines," Waycott said, saying the company will continue to work on the labour contract and power rates. Then he went on to say that Stora will also continue to look for tax breaks from Richmond County and the province, he added. So, Mr. Speaker, what we now know is that $65 million deal announced by the Minister of Natural Resources and announced by the Minister of Economic Development would do absolutely nothing to deal with the three main issues raised by Stora. And what are those three main issues? Number one, they want stability in their power rates. Well, why would they want stability in their power rates? Well, first of all, before last year, Stora was paying $85 million a year to Nova Scotia Power. They were paying more in power than they were paying in labour, which I already indicated was $65 million. While this government has sat back and watched the UARB approved increase after increase for Nova Scotia Power, here is Stora, with the challenges they face, being told that they would now get a power increase of 15%, which would mean an additional $10 to $12.75 million a year under power rates that they were already paying $85 million a year. Mr. Speaker, this government knew 3 years ago that Stora had indicated that they were paying too much for their power rates and they were uncompetitive as compared to other mills. And I remember that meeting, which I mentioned earlier, because I know that the MLA for Inverness wasn't present, nor was the MLA for Antigonish, nor was the member from Guysborough, Port Hawkesbury, Guysborough, Sheet Harbour. They sent representatives to be there at that meeting. I was there. I recognize the importance of that meeting, and I sat there and listened, because when Stora says they've got problems, I want to hear about it, and I want to hear what can be done to find solutions. And they sent representatives. But that was 3 years ago. So this is not a new issue for this government. It's not a new issue for the new Premier. But lo and behold, Mr. Speaker, now all of a sudden, the Premier at one point, who had decided to be neutral and the province didn't have a role to play, in the Cape Breton Post on March 30th, 2006, he said, it's quoted here, while he said the province has a role to play in the effort to maintain the mill, McDonald admitted that at this point he doesn't know what the role is. So the Premier didn't know what the role was at that point. But he went on further to say, quote, in the long term, we in the province are going to have to take a look at the issue of power rates for large industrial users if we want to have large industrial users here in our province, end quote, McDonald said. Well, Mr. Speaker, How much longer is it going to take before this province is prepared to look at the power rates that is being charged to companies such as Stora? Because what the government needs to realize is Stora is only the beginning. It's only the beginning. Other Nova Scotia companies will come forward as long as the Canadian dollar is as high as it is, as long as our exports are down. Other companies will start coming in as well and saying that we are uncompetitive here in Nova Scotia, because if we were in Ontario or if we were in Alberta, we'd be paying lower power rates than what we pay here in Nova Scotia. So we were uncompetitive 3 years ago based on the charts Stora presented to us that meeting, and had the Premier been there, he would have seen those charts that was shown to us then. But if we were uncompetitive 3 years ago, imagine where we're at now, 3 power rate increases later that this government has sat by and allowed to take place. Mr. Speaker, the fact is that Stora Enso is competing against other pulp and paper mills throughout North America. While over in Quebec, for example, Mr. Speaker, power rates are their number 3 expense. Wood and labor are actually a larger expense than their actual power rates. Yet here in Nova Scotia, the number 1 cost is power rates, then it's wood, and then it's a labor agreement. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I hear the Premier on the other side asking, what's the solution? Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, you're in the job now to find a solution, and I shouldn't have to tell you what that solution is, nor should I have to tell you the importance of Stora Enso, because I don't need to remind you or your family how important that mill has been to our people. And Mr. Speaker, it is no exaggeration to say the permanent closure of that mill will be utter devastation to the Strait area. It'll be devastation to Richmond. It'll be devastation to Inverness. It'll be devastation to Guysborough, and it'll certainly have an important impact on Antigonish and as well on Victoria. Now, Mr. Speaker, again, what has the government done to be able to address this issue? Yes, the Premier says they can't get involved in the union negotiations with the company. No one disagrees with that. But Stora has made it clear, even if the union signed a new agreement tomorrow, the mill will remain closed until there's stability in power rates and until there's a new tax agreement. Now, it's my understanding that a tax agreement may not be too far off. But again, the question becomes, what is the province prepared to do to bring an end to this? Mr. Speaker, I hope the Premier will take this opportunity to tell this House, to tell me, to tell the people of Strait area, what is their plan? What are they prepared to do to keep Stora here? Because, Mr. Speaker, we are all kidding ourselves, and the Premier is kidding himself if he believes that Stora will not walk away from that mill. At the end of the day, Stora Enso is a corporate entity. The Point Tupper Mill is not a large player in the overall entity. Mr. Speaker, we hear rumors as well that the company has brought in assessors. Yes. Why assessors? Well, Mr. Speaker, they're brought in to assess the value of the assets and determine what can be used by their other mills and what can be sold. How much longer is the government prepared to sit back? Why would the government even entertain going into an election knowing that such an important employer is still in a lockout situation, that over 600 families directly employed by that mill are still walking a picket line because they're locked out? Mr. Speaker, I hope tonight's emergency debate has brought a level of importance of this issue to the Premier, to his government, and I'm certainly prepared to do what I can to work with them to find solutions for Stora and to make sure that the pulp and paper industry, both at that Point Tupper Mill and throughout Nova Scotia, are guaranteed for the long term in the province of Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for Richmond for bringing this matter to the floor of the legislature. It is a very important issue, and it's an issue that this government takes very, very seriously. Like all Nova Scotians, this government hopes that Stora and its unionized employees will come to an agreement. We've said that from day one. The work stoppage is a matter for the two sides to settle. We know from experience how devastating the consequences of a strike and a labour dispute can be. Right in my own backyard, and the Honourable Member for Hants East backyard, we had to deal with a strike at National Gypsum that went on for months and months and months. And it devastated the local area, and it created a lot of concern for the employees and management. But subsequently, that labour dispute was settled, and work is going on as we speak. It's going on 7/24. So we encourage all members in this legislature to do their part and encourage both sides to get back to the table. Mr. Speaker, Minister Morash and I and this government took great pride in announcing an agreement with Stora last week, an agreement that offers benefits to the company, the Strait region, and the taxpayers of Nova Scotia. Now, Mr. Speaker, I do want to say that from a recent trip to Cape Breton, and you don't have to go to Cape Breton to be concerned about the strike at Stora, but during a recent trip to Cape Breton, we heard from a number of stakeholders, a number of community leaders that were very pleased that this government took the initiative with Stora to come up with a plan, come up with agreement, Mr. Speaker. An agreement that supports local woodlot owners, it supports truckers, and it supports other workers throughout this important industry. This agreement eliminates an obligation, a debt. It was really a debt that was incurred by a previous government, a debt to the tune of that really didn't have to be paid through a period of 2013 to the year 2013 at a future cost that no one can easily predict. But the agreement works out today to a cost of $325 per acre. Now, we know that the price of land varies from acre to acre depending on the composition of any given piece of real estate. And we know, Mr. Speaker, that the negotiations that this government took on behalf of the province of Nova Scotia and with Stora were in the best interest of this province. But more importantly, they were in the best interest of the workers and the management at Stora. No one today, no one can predict what a parcel of land might be worth tomorrow, but this government had an obligation and a responsibility and a commitment, and we are confident that the negotiators who worked on this agreement did strike a fair accord, one that both parties obviously agreed to in spirit of cooperation. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, in central Nova Scotia, in northern Nova Scotia, in Cape Breton, we are especially concerned about the consequences of Stora and the fact that that labor dispute is still going on today. We've heard from retailers, we've heard from the service industry, we've heard from truckers, we've heard from power saw operators. Everybody's concerned, but the dispute has to be settled at the table. And I think the honourable member for Richmond knows that as well, Mr. Speaker. We know, in fact, that Stora did bring some issues to this government's attention, and this government wrestled with the issues that Stora brought forward. But you know, this government has to sit down at the end of the day and be accountable to all industry in the province of Nova Scotia. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But we do want to speak a little bit more, Mr. Speaker, about the arrangement and the agreement that we do have with Stora regarding $65 million for approximately 800,000 acres of land. You know, that first payment to be made to Stora can only be made after both mills have been in operation for 12 months. Now, it not necessarily would have to be 12 consecutive months, it's 12 cumulative months. So if they work for 3 months and shut down for any reason, then of course there's a gap in the continuity of the mills working. So we feel that that is an extremely important incentive for both sides to get back to the table, Mr. Speaker. Now, we understand there are outstanding issues. There were outstanding issues before this government and Stora reached an agreement on the land or the debt that this province owed, and that debt was incurred, and we understand why, and we're not criticizing the previous government. We're not criticizing the previous government for entering into that arrangement. We think it's very important to provide.
The honourable member, the honourable leader in the House for the Liberal Party, on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure it's not the intention of the minister to in any way mislead this House, but I believe it's important that the minister be aware, had he read Stora's release, the initial agreement on Crown lands was signed in 1960. What took place in 1997 was a reactivation of the 1960 agreement, and Lord only knows who was in power back in 1960, but it would certainly be misleading to suggest that it was the last government here in Nova Scotia that somehow entered into an agreement that he says he had to reach the 65 million. That agreement was from 1960. Whoever was, maybe the government house leader was still around back then. Maybe he can tell us who was in power, but it would be erroneous to blame the previous administration.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, I thank the honourable member for pointing that out, and I do want to clarify, and not to correct the honourable member, but the obligation started actually back in 1969. That's when the obligation started, in 1969. So forgive me if I unintentionally did mislead the House. He's right. He's absolutely right that it didn't just happen in 1997. There's no doubt about this. But it shows that this government today, in 2006 is extremely concerned about agreements and debts that this province has borne, and the fact that they were basically created by former governments doesn't mean a hill of beans today. What we have, as you know, Mr. Speaker, you as a representative of Cape Breton North certainly would have heard, and still do hear, concerns in your riding about the fact that Stora, the management and the employees have not reached an agreement. It's a serious situation, but this government will continue to listen to Stora, will continue to listen to the employees. But all we can do at this point, and the honourable member I think knows, and the parties opposite, that what we can do is encourage both sides to get back to the table. Government has appointed a conciliator, and you know, it's great to get up and pontificate and criticize, you know, and the honourable member last evening, the honourable member for Colchester North said that criticism is the lowest form of wit, Mr. Speaker, and you know, I kind of half believe him when he brought that forward. And I think what we're trying to say here, well, what we're trying to say here today is that while the honourable member for Richmond got up and said that it's up to you to find a solution, I think that we all recognize that this problem is a problem not only for the province of Nova Scotia, it's a problem for everybody in this legislature, because Stora is one of the staples, one of the backbone companies of the province of Nova Scotia and Cape Breton. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So, Mr. Speaker, this government is committed, very committed to working with Stora. We're very committed to working with other companies that are in trouble in Nova Scotia, and we'll continue to do that, Mr. Speaker. So I do want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do want to thank the member opposite for bringing this very important matter to the floor of the legislature. Thank you. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to congratulate the member for Richmond for bringing this forward, because it is indeed a very, very serious matter for all parties involved in this. And no matter what side of the dispute you're on, it is a serious matter, and one that really truly fits the definition of an emergency debate for what's going on in this province. But, you know, as some of my seatmates will be getting up and speaking in other aspects on this debate, I'm going to limit most of my remarks around the collective bargaining process. And let's get something off the table first. Like, Speaker, the fact of the matter is, when someone makes a statement that the government has provided a conciliator, like, that's a non-starter. We know through the Trade Union Act, before a work stoppage, whether it's a lockout or a strike, can be legally affected, that's part of the process you have to go over. So it's no big magnanimous type of decision made by government to appoint a conciliator. It's a matter of fact. So, you know, that's you know, when members bring that to this floor, it's much more a ruse. Now, we look at what's going on at Stora, and it is a very involved industry, the paper making industry and the pulp paper industry in general. But for years before many of us were ever in this House, it's always been agreed to around that industry of what's referred to as pattern bargaining. And pattern bargaining is quite simply this way, that the unions affect one employer, and that employer then signs on to agreement that's patterned out through all the rest of the industry from Quebec East. It's a very simple process. But what we're hearing yesterday when Stora left the table, they're saying was, look, we have to change this process, which is fine, and they have every right to do in the collective bargaining process. The problem with it is you can't be saying that after 5 months into a lockout. They knew where they were going with this problem. They knew, as they're telling everybody today, that the collective agreement isn't the only kind of obstacle in the way of getting that mill up and operating. But nonetheless, that's where they're at. So let's look. They have not said anything yet what's referred to as the Abitibi Agreement. They have not come out publicly and said, this is wrong with the Abitibi Agreement. Yet they keep using kind of veiled threats of what they're going to do. If they want public money, public participation in their settlement, I think they have to be open and tell the general public what's wrong with the Abitibi Agreement that would hurt them in the collective bargaining process. You know, we hear that, and they say, and I think the industry will bear this out, that there's an excess of newspaper making capacity within North America. Some industry special analysts will tell you that there's probably as much as 15 redundant machines in North America. And so how do we weed those 15 machines out? Well, I'm just hoping that Stora isn't using this lockout as their initiative to get rid of that, what's referred to as PM1, Mr. Speaker. So why, you know, again, why aren't they telling the people of Nova Scotia what they want? They're asking for participation from this government, which in essence is the people of this province, to give them something. And if that's what they want, then they have to be open and make sure that all Nova Scotians know what it's going to take to keep them here. It's a very simple plan. But, you know, we see this coming, and the Premier himself, though, has excused himself in the process. Now, some of the other speakers said, well, you know, we really don't expect the Premier to be at the table. But, you know, and I firmly agree with that. But there's times when the Premier can be with the community. Now, on March 18th, they had a public rally. Now, was he there? No. You know, he had other commitments. Well, you know, that's fine. I respect that the Premier is a busy man. But was the Minister of Transportation and Public Works there? One of his senior ministers who's I'm sure has people in his constituency that are work directly with Stora and are indirectly involved. No, they weren't there. My good friend, the Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture, I'm sure some of his constituents are involved either directly or indirectly with this lockout. Were they there? No. This is the angst that community feels about this government, that the government has let them down, that the government is not there for them. When the Premier and two senior ministers can't be there in a dire need to show that there's community support. No one was asked, any of those people, to get up and say, we support one side of the dispute against the other side of the dispute. All they were there was to show that they support the community. But there was no one to be found to represent any of those offices. I know I was there, my leader was there, the member from Richmond was there, but nobody from the governing party. And that has to be demoralizing for the people in that community. The people in that community wanted their leaders, not to say the workers are right and the employer's wrong. They didn't want that. They wanted to know that their government was in the trenches with them. It's all they expected from them. But they got a no reply from their government. And you know, some of these problems are starting to worry the workers more than just no paycheck. Because there's a problem within that industry, within the pulp and paper industry, that has been manufactured by this government. And part of that problem is what we call the grow-in benefits in their pension plans. Now, this government could have kept their hands out of there and allowed just the municipalities that wanted to be exempt from the grow-in benefit. No, that wasn't good enough for this government. This government opened that Pandora's box, and industry said, we want that too. We want that too. So what's going to happen? Now that these folks, these employers are giving their right to the grow-in benefits, we see that we're going to have what was done in Mactaquac in New Brunswick. Very simply here, Mr. Speaker. You're going to see people, members of this House whose own families work there, possibly be injured in their pension benefits simply because of a government action on the grow-in benefit. And yet, the government doesn't take responsibility for it. This is a major problem that people, and I'm going to tell you this, if it's anything like Mactaquac, you see people who went out on pension and are receiving about 50% of the benefits that they had worked a lifetime to get. But with a stroke of a pen from the Executive Council, that can all be in danger now. If because of government inaction, if this plant is taken and shut down and moved away to Wisconsin or whatever, that is a real problem. It's a problem that this government has to bear fully and completely. It's a problem of their doing. It's nobody else's. It's their doing. They could have done the right thing last year when we asked them to take it out, but yet they did it in Governor and Council, and they know they did it in a way that was going to offend people in this problem, in this province, Mr. Speaker. So, you know, we have many problems facing this, but, you know, Stora has not once, you know, other than they want a 10% rollback in wages. You know, Nina Paper has signed. They've signed down in Lunenburg, or Liverpool, excuse me. Why is Stora's power rates more? Well, one of it is obviously is how they make pulp in Nina, but they make pulp in same way at Bowater. But it's, you know, we're all being held hostage here in some respect, and it's how we free those hostage, which is going to be the telltale sign. It's going to tell us whether we're a progressive province or we're one that just, you know, throws up our hands and say, that's it. You know, whatever you want, we're hostage. We're going to do it. We've had, you know, Stora is not Nova Scotia Paper Products. It's not the Stora from Sweden. It's a Stora from Finland. We know it's a different employer. We've seen Stora go from, this is the highest electrical rates we face anywhere, to admitting to Nova Scotia Power that it's actually middle of the pack. So what we need from that employer is clarity and honesty so we can deal with them. We respect them as an employer. They should respect us as a province and as workers. They should be truthful with us. Let's not play a game of chicken here. Let's not play a game with the employees, the lives. You know, you look down in the Strait area, and you know, I'm sure the members in this House that come from that area know that the local Board of Trade is trying their darndest to put a good face on this situation. And it's, you know, and it's almost becoming painful to watch that they're out there, they're doing everything they can do to make this situation palatable. You know, thank goodness we've gone through a mild winter that would allow, you know, some lower costs on people for home heating and so on, so that they could, that this lockout has not been as burdensome as it could. You know, we have an industry that, when it's working, pays its employees well. The benefits are very good. But these weren't benefits that the employer kind of parachuted in overnight and said, here, we'll give you this, give you this, give you this. These were items that were garnered through hard, tough bargaining, some strikes, some lockouts, but they were, over a period of time, agreed to. And they were agreed to in an era when papermaking was different. And we acknowledge that. I think the workers at Communication Energy Workers understand that. But the fact of the matter is, nobody can negotiate with the proverbial gun to their head, Mr. Speaker. We are in an era of change. That's fine. But the employer has to change too. The employer just can't come and want the full collective agreement wiped out and give all the stack of chips over to their side of the table. That management and union, management employees work better when there's a give and take, when there's an honesty, when things are imbalanced. Neither one, the whole idea around collective bargaining is that of balance. Nobody wants to negotiate themselves out of a job with agreements that are too rich. There's nobody saying that. But on the other side of it is, you're not going to grow an economy by making yourself out to a bunch of Walmart-type workers that are all part-time. You need dependable salaries coming into communities that people know is going to be there at the end of the day. They know that at the end of the day, that they'll quite, can't have anything guaranteed, Mr. Speaker, but that they will have a good understanding that there'll be a measure of income they will have from one year to the other. That these things are not to be taken away. But if there is certain differences and anomalies that are going on in the world around the paper industry, then I think the union is sympathetic and will be able to react to it. But as we see, unless Stora wants to come forward with some real numbers, that I don't believe that it's incumbent upon anybody to give them money out of the public purse unless we see what the public is getting back for it. That they will be around, that there will be secure jobs, that there will be well-paying jobs, that people see a future there, that our forests are looked after, which I said my other members of my caucus certainly will be talking about. But Mr. Speaker, it's too late in the game for Stora to come forward now and saying we need to change the bargaining process. They need to come forward and say, let's deal with what we got and get a collective agreement. Thank you.
The honourable member for Victoria, the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by thanking the honourable member from Richmond for bringing the issue forward, not so much as because it's located where it is within his riding, but he recognizes, along with myself, the heavy financial impact that Stora has on the whole province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, what I would like to do is refer to some local companies in my own area, and that example can be taken and applied all across the province. But before I do that, I would like to mention the fact that Stora, when they made a presentation to caucus, gave their side of the story, and my question to them at that time was, your business is changing. One time the telephone was a wonderful thing. We were amazed at faxes. Now faxes are gone by the wayside and everybody carries a BlackBerry or a cell phone. So just the fact that faxes are gone by the wayside means that there's less paper being used. It's electronic communication. I said, what are you going to do in your business that you produce paper? And they have a plan that even local newspapers would change over a period of time. Therefore, there's a downturn in the paper industry, and they are suffering the effects of that. But while they're here, and have been here, and you heard the honourable member from Richmond say that there's numerous times $65 million in wages, let's just concentrate on that for a moment. That $65 million, although it's a massive figure, is only the wages for Stora. The questions that I receive on a daily basis are, what about me? What about me and my business? What about my trucking business? Come on, Sam, do something for me. I truck logs. I sell chainsaws. I supply tires to these guys. I supply teeth for their cutting machines. And it just goes on and on and on. And because Stora is such a giant, because Stora is such an invaluable part of the economy of Nova Scotia, and it was so very welcome to be here, we're caught in a bit of a web. I wouldn't say a spider web, but I would say, Mr. Speaker, that it's a web of economic spin-off, which creates a web of development, but on the reverse side, it's created a web of dependability. Stora can go out to its customers and they have several of those. But these local companies, depending upon this giant, need Stora to sell their products. Without Stora, there's no trucking companies, no logging companies, no small mills, no large mills, and the list goes on and on. Even, I would just ask the honorable members to think of just the local hardware store. Somebody who deals in something as standard as nuts and bolts. How much of an income that would be for them with such a large giant in their presence. All is said and done with these companies. How about the families? The numerous families. And I will mention, Mr. Speaker, companies that work in Cape Breton, and as I said, it'll be a perfect example for all across the province. When you take, for example, McGuinness Lumber in French Vale, 1 week after the announcement of the strike, I received a call from Brett McGuinness, owner of McGuinness Lumber. And Mr. Speaker, he was very upset at the fact, wondering how long would the strike continue? If I had any information, could I go public? Is there anything I could do? Is there any members of the caucus I could contact? What could we do to facilitate an end to the strike? The reason he was so concerned, Mr. Speaker, was because when he called me 1 week after the strike with 20 employees, he had to lay off 17 immediately. 17 families got hit from his company alone the very first week of the strike. Secondly, if you were to phone McGuinness Lumber, the answering service would tell you that you've reached the McGuinness companies. They have McGuinness Lumber, they own a transport company, and they also own French Vale Pulp. So there's 3 companies just under one umbrella of the McGuinness companies. Brett McGuinness informed me that there were 5 other operations that are tied into them through the forestry industry that were being severely impacted and extremely finding hardships through the extreme amount of lack of work and nowhere to sell their wood. And the psychological effect, Mr. Speaker, of not knowing the future. None of us know that, none of us have a crystal ball, but when we know the future at least when we have a paycheck coming, and that's what I'm referring to. On Bullardry Island, there's a young couple there that I know, Mark and Gina Ryan, young married couple balancing their financial needs, and they decided that with their large investment, they would sell off wood on their property, and that would allow them to help a local woodcutter who's been very good to them, and they would also make a few dollars to offset their financial investment to improve the property that they invested a large amount of money in. They did that through the fall, and lo and behold, just before the market time came for their wood, along came the strike. The strike has progressed so long that now they're told their wood is too dry to sell. So this wood will, I guess, eventually be cut up and supposedly burned in a wood stove rather than being sold to the pulp and paper mill. So it affected somebody somebody that's not even involved in the industry, it affected them also. All along when I was watching these trucks before the strike, I see a lot of these trucks taking the wood to Stora, which is good, but I also see a lot of these trucks now taking the wood off of the island to New Brunswick. It's costly, and yet the processing of this wood, jobs are always in the processing, more so than in the initial beginning of the product. And we are losing out on that, Mr. Speaker, because other areas actually are benefiting from our strike. We've heard today about the Shaw Group, the furniture division, closing in Cornwallis with the loss of 200 jobs. What has that got to do with Stora? The fact is that, Mr. Speaker, there was only one, they had one product and one purchaser, one supplier, one outlet to sell their product. This is what's gone on with the lumber industry, the forestry industry in our area. Stora was the big buyer. Without Stora, everything else seems to fall apart. They are the key to the economic driver in the forest industry here in Nova Scotia. What I would like to see, Mr. Speaker, we have NSBI who invest in companies and develop business, but I would like to see them be more proactive in the fact that sometimes rather than going out and always looking for something new, my motto has always been to develop what we have. We have Stora, we have these other companies around, we have these small mills, we have some larger mills. Take a look at those and see what improvements could be made to those in modernization and something that would be innovative, because you just can't stand still in today's market. The web of economic spin-off is felt from my area, Victoria, the Lakes, right through to the other end of the province in Yarmouth. We have woodcutters, people selling chainsaws for a living, some selling chainsaws as an addition to a hardware store, the trucking industry. Mr. Speaker, let me give you an absolute example instead of speaking in some generalities. I'll go back to Brett McGuinness. 1 week after the strike, he said to me, "Gerald, I have arrangements made with my financial institution to purchase a $180,000 piece of equipment, and the bank just can't wait to give me the money." What I'm telling you was prior to the strike. Since the strike came about, he said, and we're pretty well ready to move forward with this new piece of equipment, I had difficulty phoning the bank. I had difficulty getting an answer, and basically nobody wanted to speak to me about investing in my business until the strike is over. On top of that, large payments per month on the existing machinery, large payrolls that they provide, and all held in abeyance until this strike is settled. Mr. Speaker, the Premier knows only too well of the effect of employment just on his immediate area, because with his relatives that work there, his constituents that work there, and just everybody, any and everyone who travels to and from the area that are employed, that to take, as the member from Richmond said, $65 million out of the economy in payroll and benefits is a large impact, but at the same time, not the total amount of the dollar value that we're talking. All these companies, the five companies in my area, the 3 companies that McGuinness Lumber have, the wood that's laying on the shoulders of the road that can't be sold, the wood that was cut previous to the strike, the wood that's not cut now because of the strike. It's too important to ignore. I'm not saying that the government is ignoring it, but somebody has to step to the plate and resolve this. I give a note of caution for this government not to play roulette with this important employer. I understand that you just can't back away from this giant. David killed the giant, or David killed Goliath. That may be a wrong example, because I don't think in this situation, Mr. Speaker, it would work. Fuel prices have gone through the roof. Power rates are excessive to encourage development. And I understand through Nova Scotia Power that, from the presentation was made to our caucus, that Nova Scotia Power is making more money selling this power on the grid than they were when they were selling it to Stora. So there's really no impact on Nova Scotia Power. So, Mr. Speaker, trying to summarize what was said and give some actual facts of the impact, I can't overestimate or overstate the fact that something has to be done. It has to be done soon. And if we're going to look at what was said in the budget today about the improvements to highways and whatnot, after what I heard today, I know that I now live in utopia, but I'm just wondering if I can discover the postal code. I have my address, I have the name, but I don't have the postal code, and I hope that we can look forward to the resolution of this strike, and then we can all say that a job well done. But, Mr. Speaker, I fear that's not going to be the case. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the time and the privilege to address this severe situation.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased tonight to be able to be given the opportunity to rise and speak to an issue that's of great importance to my constituency and to the people. And I commend the member from Richmond for bringing this resolution forward. For as has been noted already this evening, the enormity of Stora's business means not only is the future of its workers in question, even as I speak, others are being impacted while the business of the mill remains at a standstill. Contractors, pulp cutters, not to mention the many retailers, gas stations, convenience stores, and others whose business is lucrative only because the business of the mill and his workforce. Many have stated the closing of the mill means the subsequent closing of their business. Mr. Speaker, I'm not saying anything that hasn't already been emphasized in debate this evening. However, I wanted to be on the record on an issue of such importance and of my deep concerns for Stora's future. It has been a few years, but I too was one of those individuals relying on the contract work from Stora at one point in my life. I have cut wood for Stora. I have trucked wood to the mill in Stora. I know many of the workers at Stora. I know many of the contractors that supply Stora. Mr. Speaker, to name a few, Thomas Hain from Country Harbour, Miles McPherson, Guysborough Innerful, Sean Hadley in Guysborough, Lloyd and Ellis McGraw, Aspen, Sherman Wilson, Liscombe, Anthony Turner, Mosers River, John Archibald, Newtown. Mr. Speaker, all of these contractors that supply Stora employ at least 10, some of them 20 employees. So it does have a real impact on my riding. This issue, as everyone here knows, is not about the quality of the individuals employed with the company. It is not about their commitment to their product. It is not about their reluctance to do hard work and to do it well. It's about issues slightly beyond everyone's control. The industry itself is facing serious challenges. However, as a government, we recognize that the spin-off effects would be devastating to the region. As Roger Taylor of the Chronicle Herald noted this past week, if a compromise cannot be found to save that plant, it will have a devastating impact on the economy of the Strait of Canso area, which will send ripples to the rest of the provincial economy. While we could not, in all fairness, accommodate all the items addressed by the mill, we did work on a solution we felt would be helpful to the mill, and most importantly, we hoped it would help with a solution for the workers in the community. As my colleagues have noted, We have an agreement in place that would pay Stora Enso. Now for land, government was obligated to provide the company in the future. The offer to pay Stora $65 million over the next 7 years, provided the company continues normal operations, means we no longer have to buy 200,000 acres of land it had been obligated to provide to Stora by 2013. We also felt it would be a workable component of a solution needed for both employer and employees. As I have said, I was just one of those individuals that benefited some time ago from work generated in our community by Stora Enso. I know the solution we presented also meant that a little less Crown land would mean more product would be needed from our private woodlot owners. And Mr. Speaker, that's a good thing. But that was just one part of the puzzle. The bottom line for, I believe, everyone in this chamber this evening is that Stora Enso reopened its doors. That, as one member has said, we see smoke coming from the stacks again. The only way that can happen is for both sides to get back to the table. We need everyone to be realistic about what is at stake and what is possible to put on the table. While news that the return to the table Monday was not a positive venture, I remain hopeful that both parties can find common ground to ensure that Stora Enso remains a part of our economy and a part of our community so that livelihoods of all those relying on it can continue to do so. Mr. Speaker, thank you again for allowing me to take part in this evening's debate on this very important issue to the people of my riding. Thank you.
The honourable member for Halifax-Shabukto.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. We've been told that the Stora situation has something to do with what have been called issues beyond our control. Issues beyond our control. You know what? I don't believe that. I don't believe that's the case. It simply is not true. What is within the government's control? What has been within the government's control? I'll tell you the answer to that. It has always been within the government's control to foresee and anticipate that we would arrive one day at this situation with respect to our forestry. Let's be clear, our forestry is in big trouble in Nova Scotia. And this should come as no surprise to anyone. We heard today about the closure of a manufacturing plant in the Cornwallis Industrial Park in the Annapolis Valley. 200 jobs are going to be lost in July. Now that's a manufacturing, a secondary industry, a value-added industry tied to forestry. And we're losing those jobs. And Stora, one of our 3 major pulp and paper plants, which has been in this province, along with the others, for about 40 years, is also in big trouble. And yet, we have known for a long time that our over-reliance in our forestry industry on pulp and paper as a final destination for our forest products has been a big mistake, and that industry is hugely vulnerable. It has always been hugely vulnerable, and yet that basic fact was ignored year in, year out by government after government, who failed to try to put into place an effective transformation of the forestry industry. Well, here we are. Here we are at the point where we are probably going to lose at least one of our major pulp and paper plants. Now, I'm suggesting that this was foreseeable. I am now going to demonstrate to you not only that it was foreseeable, but that it was foreseen. And I am one of those who happens to have foreseen it, but I am not alone in this. Many others, anyone who looked seriously at forestry over the last 20 years in Canada would have known this. Mr. Speaker, in the early 1990s, it became the fashion in Canada for each province to set up what was known as a roundtable on environment and the economy. Each province was encouraged to do this by the federal government, which had set up its own roundtable on environment and the economy, an entity that it continues to exist to this day. Well, for a couple of years, Nova Scotia had an active roundtable on the environment and the economy. And in 1991, a group of people from the environmental movement in Nova Scotia made a submission to the Nova Scotia Roundtable, and the submission was called Building a Green Nova Scotia. It's dated 1991. It's in our legislative library. I was minded to pull it out. I was one of the main authors of this report. And I went to see what it is that we had to say about forestry. Not that I had forgotten, because I remembered exactly what we had said about forestry. And what we said was, it's an pulp and paper is an internationally traded commodity. Now let me pause for a moment and point something out about environmentalists. I've heard some comments in this House and elsewhere over the years that suggest that environmentalists are interested in admiring the view that we don't have hard-nosed approaches to the economy. Let me tell you, that is not true. One does not have to think that clear-cutting is an abomination, or that growing only one or two species is an abomination, to arrive at the conclusion that we arrived at in 1991, that our forestry was in big trouble, because here were the factors that we identified. We said, first, we are being competed with by warm climates where they can grow very quickly trees like eucalyptus in 10 years that are ready to be made into pulp and paper, compared with our 40 to 60 years to grow our trees to be made into pulp and paper. And you know what? It used to be that those trees from the warm climates, they didn't know how to make them into good pulp and paper, but they learned pretty quick. So on the supply side, our trees, our forests were being competed with. We said this in a submission in 1991. I'll tell you something else we said. We said in 1991, the Cold War was over. It had been over for 2 years, and what that meant was that the vast forests of the former USSR were going to come on to the international marketplace, and they were going to compete with us. It used to be that their products were aimed only at the Soviet bloc in terms of where they went, but we said that was going to change. And you know what? Later in the year, after we said that in our reports, I was at a national forestry conference where the chief forester of Abitibi-Price was present. And I put it to him, is this going to happen, I said? Do you think it's going to happen? And he said, oh yes. Is it going to happen within 10 years, I said, which is what I thought. No, he said, we've thought about this. We've actually had teams over in the Soviet Union looking at their forests. I figure it'll take about 25 years before they get on to the international commodities market in a really big way. And we, Canadian companies, are going to be building pulp and paper plants over there for them. Now, isn't that wonderful? But they knew then that that was going to be a potent factor. Now, let me add another factor. Pulp and paper is used for newsprint. And newspapers were already losing out to their main advertising dollar competitors, namely radio and television at that time. And now you can add the internet as a competitor for advertising dollars. Now, those are hard-nosed economic facts that have nothing to do with whether you think that the way we have clear-cut our province, the way we have confined ourselves to growing only a few species has been ridiculous and an abomination. I think those things, but a person did not have to think those things in order to arrive at the conclusion, as we did in 1991, that our forestry industry was gravely at risk. And here we are, 15 years later, and it is coming to pass. And I want to emphasize that I am not the only one who predicted this. One merely has to look at any of the writings of people from the environmental movement in those days to see that this was what was on the agenda and was identified as being on the agenda. What should government have done? Government should have stood up at the time and said the same thing. The number one job of government when it comes to transformation of the economy is to identify that it's coming, tell people that it's coming, help communities plan for the transformation, because that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a transformation of the economy, in this case, the forestry sector, but there's a transformation going on in all aspects of the economy: forestry, in fisheries, in agriculture, in energy, in all forms of land use. It's happening. Here's one of the things we said in this report, and I'll table it. I'll table the extract. If there is no planning now for diversification, what will happen to the many people who now rely on forestry? They will have to move, and we will have clear-cut our population along with our forests, a double waste. Unless urgent steps are taken, in 20 years, the forest industry in Nova Scotia will be unable to support people in anything remotely approaching the same manner as now. That's exactly true, Mr. Speaker, and it's coming to pass right now. There are a huge number of people who, to a greater or lesser degree in Nova Scotia, rely upon forestry. We have been laggards in trying to make the transformation. But we have to adjust our thinking and realize that there are major changes coming. But what are we going to do about Stora now? The government has said that it's prepared to come up with a little bit of financial help. But you know what? That makes no sense if they have to do it year after year after year. Surely it was that party, now in government, that told us, when they so successfully ran and accomplished the role of becoming a majority government in 1999, that they didn't want to continue to support industries that were old industries and were money-losing industries, and that the government had to keep on supporting. That's what the closure of Sydney Steel was all about. That was their main plank at the time. And they're not going to do that. And we shouldn't expect them to do that. Now, some money should certainly be put into it as a transition measure, if that's what we have to do to take care of the workers who are going to be displaced if that plant closes up. But be clear, if that plant closes up, it'll be closing up not because of their local taxes, not because even of the corporate tax on their capital goods, and not because of their electricity rates. It won't have nothing to do with that. It will be because of those factors that we identified back in 1990, international competition from other sources and diminishing markets for their products. That's why they'll be closing up, if they close up indeed. And we have 3 major pulp and paper plants in this province, each one just as vulnerable. We have to be prepared for that. What about the workers? They have to be taken care of. If the government wants to put money in order, in conjunction with a transformation project in which they help people find other work, in which they address the forestry sector, they address the needs of rural Nova Scotia, and they find other kinds of work, that's fine. I would expect that of them. But I don't want to see this continue to happen in every other sector of our economy, but I am much afeared that if the history goes on in this way, that's exactly what we'll see. Mr. Speaker, we saw a new document come from the government just a couple of weeks ago called their Sustainable Economic Strategy. I was reminded when I read that Sustainable Economic Strategy of the old jokes we used to see about detergent where it says new on the outside of the box. What's new? People ask each other. The word new, that's all that's new on the outside of the box. What was different about the economic strategy that we saw from the government a couple of weeks ago was that they put the word sustainable on the outside. Well, sustainable is the right principle, but let me tell you, there was nothing that reflected it in the actual strategy itself. Sustainability is what we have to achieve in all of our sectors, and sustainability is exactly what doesn't seem to be on the government's mind. I say that this is where we have to move. We have to take that as our guiding principle in every sector, and we have to realize that the Nova Scotia economy, being so resource reliant, is under threat. We could have learned from the time of the fishery collapse and prepared for the forestry. Now we're looking at the possibility of a forestry collapse. We have to learn the lessons and act on them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, certainly it's appropriate that all members of the House are concerned about what's happening at Stora, and I believe that all members are concerned in varying degrees. I'd rather be somewhere else at this hour of the evening than talking about Stora. I wish that situation was stabilized and that the people that work at that mill could look forward to going back to work sometime in the future, but it doesn't appear like that's going to be the case. First of all, I'd like to thank the member from Richmond for raising this matter today and bringing it to the attention of all Nova Scotians. And I want to say about the member of Richmond that he speaks about issues with much passion, especially when it comes to the issues of business like Stora in our province, businesses like Stora who are so important to the economy of the entire province. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that the member from Richmond is certainly not playing politics with this issue. He is genuinely concerned about the future of the people of the Strait area and the future of the people of this province when it comes to the economic stimulation that a business like Stora has produced for many, many years in Nova Scotia, the kinds of salaries that are generated in the economy, the kinds of spin-off benefits that a company like Stora has contributed over the course of their time here in Nova Scotia. It is appropriate that we're having an emergency debate this evening on this subject, and it is also appropriate, Mr. Speaker, that we remind the government that this situation, this impasse, this situation with the future of Stora did not happen overnight. The government has known for some time, or if the political masters opposite didn't know, certainly the bureaucrats in this government at senior levels who are dealing with Stora knew that this situation was becoming intolerant for the company, for the workers, and for government. The government knew this, but did nothing until the last moment when the employees decided that they couldn't come to a contract, and all of a sudden Stora decided that it was becoming too expensive to operate here in Nova Scotia. So what did the government do? Nothing in the first going off, nothing at all. Just sat back and said, we're not going to get involved. Now that was up until a few days ago. And like this government in so many ways in the past week or so, they've suddenly changed their minds on what level of involvement they're going to get or going to have in this province in regards to various issues. Gas regulation said it couldn't be done, or said they weren't interested in it before. Now it's on the plate. Yeah. You know, the fact that this government has now, with Stora, gotten to a situation where they're advancing an agreement that was made, and to see a member of the government here today try to blame the $65 million payment on the previous government was drawing a long bow to the point of being ridiculous. That issue had nothing to do, and by the way, is not going to solve this problem. There are certain issues here, Mr. Speaker, that are very relevant to the situation currently, and also situations which have to be rectified in the future if Stora is going to continue to operate here in Nova Scotia. Now, Mr. Speaker, we heard earlier today that this government was considering doing some work in the highways between New Glasgow and down into Cape Breton over the next 10 years. It's called twinning. Well, 5 or 6 years ago, we heard the same announcement between New Glasgow and Antigonish to help the economy of eastern Nova Scotia and Cape Breton. Since that time and before that, we now have the mines closed in Cape Breton. We have the steel plant that's closed in Cape Breton. We have very little left in the fishery in Cape Breton. The forestry is in great jeopardy in Cape Breton. Farming industry is pretty well gone in Cape Breton. What do we have down there? Well, we have a lot of call centers. Now, the government must realize, and I'm making the analogy here because it's very important, the government has to realize that the technology that's in place in call centers is not going to be around forever. And the government has to have a plan for the future economy of that part of Nova Scotia at some point without call centers. But the government is not paying any attention to that because that's off into the future regarding the economy of this province, and what they're dealing with is today and today only in regards to that. It's funny, you know, the Industrial Expansion Fund has been put in place as a government slush fund. Government slush fund, Mr. Speaker, to dish out money at will to friends of the government or to business in this province that NSBI won't touch for various business reasons, I suppose, like Magic Valley or S&J Potatoes, and other examples I could give. But the example I want to give is that Stora, Mr. Speaker, is a business in this province that employs a great number of people, and the spin-offs are well, it's so large that you can't conceive of that business not operating without devastating that area of Nova Scotia, and to a lesser extent all of Nova Scotia, and particularly, as my colleague from Victoria the Lakes talked about, or Victoria the Lakes? Victoria the Lakes, that's right. Yeah, he spoke about it earlier, and he talked about the fact that his friends in the woodlot business, customers using Stora as a customer, they've laid off people. I know people personally in that business, Mr. Speaker, that have gone to Alberta looking for work. That's a direct result of the inability of that particular woodlot developer or business to keep these people employed. So we're dealing with a devastation here. We're dealing with a situation that needs the government's attention. It needs the senior people employed by this government to sit down and stay at the table with Stora officials, to stay at the table with the people who are working there, to try to hammer out some kind of an agreement that will at least see a stability there until the future of that business can be properly evaluated by everybody. And I believe that's going to take a lot of goodwill from a number of people. But you know, the government wasn't getting involved at all up until a few weeks ago, and then they come up with what the Premier, I think, hoped would be a satisfactory solution, and we know now that that's not the case. This is a serious situation. Government mediators should be there and there all the time. It's about doing what's right. It's about protecting jobs here in Nova Scotia that I believe the administration has a responsibility to do. What's the sense in improving infrastructure, albeit it was over a 10-year period that those highway improvements were announced, and we've seen very little as you move east. You know, Mr. Speaker, when you go east, the highways get worse and worse and worse until you get down in Cape Breton, where Route 4 looks like the Burma Trail, you know, when you drive down it, and you take your life, literally your life in your hands driving down Route 4. And so, you know, if we're going to get good infrastructure, we have to have a reason for it. We have to have business down there. We have to have business at the Strait area. We have some other troubling things happening at the Strait area. Anadarko, you know, what's happening down there? The government, if the government doesn't realize that there's a problem there as well, then the government should be sitting down with them and finding out what the problem is. That's another major hit that could happen down there. And I say, Mr. Speaker, that those situations are situations that the government has a responsibility to be debating and trying to do something with all the time. I can tell you that our party is hoping that the government will come up with a meaningful solution to the problems at Stora, and that our hope is that the men will be able to return to work in meaningful employment many, many years into the future. And I know the member from Richmond wishes that as well, and we're certainly following his lead in this matter. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to be able to rise this evening and speak about the importance of Stora. And I think it's certainly important for all members of this House to appreciate and understand, and as has been said earlier, we certainly all agree on what an important industry Stora is for that part of the province as well as the entire province. And it is certainly everyone's intention that we get that plant back and running. We certainly want them to reopen the mill. We want them to continue to have a continued long history of success. We want to ensure that we have employment in that area and that we get those 600 people back to work. Now, my information says 600. I know the member opposite earlier said 650, but certainly that would be the ballpark range of the number of employees who are dependent on that mill as their primary income. And at this point in time do not have jobs to go to during the day. We have at least that many people who are working in the forests or are not working in the forests at this point in time because they supply that mill. Their job is to make sure that they have the raw material to the machinery that produces the pulp and produces the paper, and that means we have probably a threefold number of people who are dependent as, I guess you'd say, secondary income or secondary spin-off income from that facility. It's a large employer, it's an economic generator, and it certainly is important, as I said earlier, to all of us. The mill is also significant for taxpayers in general. It brings in export dollars, and most of its product is exported, and one of the ways that we grow this province is to export a product and bring money from other areas back home. And that's one of the things that we haven't been doing in that area as well as we had been doing previous because of the shutdown at this point in time. We get that boost, and it's a very significant boost from Stora, and that's something that we all agree we want to have the mill back. Direct and indirect provincial taxes alone generate about $17 million each year through the continued operation of the mill, and that's $17 million in revenues to the province that are used for schools and for hospitals and for roads and for all those infrastructure issues that had been mentioned by the member previously. And that is a secondary thing as well. The big issue is making sure that we have people back to work and we have people in that mill. There's also another matter, or a second matter, that certainly everyone in this House agrees to, and that's the quality and the dedication of the employees of that facility. We are fortunate to have excellent employees in this province, throughout the province, and that workforce is a dedicated and skilled workforce that has the ability to run a very complex factory and to do it very effectively and efficiently. And during or through the years, as we've gotten to this stage, those employees have certainly worked very, very, very hard. There have been issues in the past, and they have been able to overcome those issues. And this is certainly one that has taken much longer than anyone had anticipated or expected. And we really want them to be able to sort out the issues that are in front of them, get through those challenges, and get that facility running. Some of the realities that face industry are some of the issues that really make this quite a difficult issue, and a difficult one certainly to fix, I guess, is a very simplistic way of looking at it. There are a lot of factors at play here. We have great people working in a very important industry, and they are now facing challenges, and a lot of the challenges are outside their areas of control. And the challenges facing the industry are not unique to Nova Scotia. The demand for paper products in North America is falling. It's not increasing, unfortunately, from our point of view. And at the same time, energy prices, which everybody has been following and has been discussed in this place today, energy prices are increasing, and that poses additional costs to running a facility such as that. Also, one other issue that has come to the forefront recently is the rise in the Canadian dollar. And most of these facilities would sell in U.S. dollars and have been able in the past to have a rate of return because of the exchange on the dollar, and that rate of return has diminished considerably, and it certainly appears by what the economists tell us that it's not likely to drop drastically anytime in the near future, and if anything, it will hold where it is and maybe even increase in the future. So that's a very concerning issue, because it is a global issue, and it's not one that anybody in this place or anybody in this province has a direct hand into adjusting, changing, or regulating. That's the way the global economy works, and that's the way the money market works. Earlier today, my colleague, the Minister of Finance, announced our plan to promote a more competitive corporate tax environment. First, the province will continue phasing out the capital tax for large corporations and until it's fully eliminated in 2012. And that, I believe, is important for industry to hear. That's a tax that has had lots of discussion, and the majority of industry certainly want to see that tax eliminated. I think most would appreciate that if we could do that in a more timely manner, that would be great, but there are limitations, and we do have 2012 as our date for the tax to be fully eliminated. We're also introducing a new energy efficiency tax credit against the large corporations tax, capital tax, and the credit will help promote energy conservation and the use of renewable energy. Those measures are intended to help all industries become more competitive, not just Stora, but that is something that they will be able to use and to benefit from. And our government has tailored the plan so that Stora will be able to access that and gain some benefit from it. We've committed to provide Stora Enso with $65 million over the next 7 years. In return, Stora needs to keep both mills open, and taxpayers will be freed from an obligation that they had to buy 200,000 acres of land for the company in the future. And we believe that this is something that the province and that the government could do to assist the company at a time when they do need some cash to be able to look at cogeneration or whatever it might be that the company decides is the most efficient and effective way for them to move forward. And this plan does this. And I know the members opposite said that all of a sudden, but I can assure everybody that these deals take more time than all of a sudden. And we were working with them and dealing with them for a period of time prior to the deal being finalized. The reasoning behind the agreement is really quite simple. We want to make sure that they have some money for strategic investment and that they can be more competitive. And the word that we have heard in my time in this House when it comes to economic development is competitiveness, and it's something that is going to continue. We have the global economy out there breathing down our necks, and we need to be very efficient and effective and smart in order to be able to cover what we need to cover and compete. Members disagree about what we can and what we cannot do, but we do agree that on the importance of the facility, and I think it's really important for all of us to realize that the parameters that are there, and also there are some things that we can work on together. But if we look at the collective bargaining system, it really falls to the union and to the negotiating team for the employer to sit down and look at the challenges that face this facility globally as well as locally. And they are the ones at the bargaining table. They are the ones who should be at the bargaining table. And I don't believe that this government or any member in this House has a right to be at that table. That's something that they'll need to do. Mr. Speaker, I see I'm getting the nod that my time is just about over. I'd just like to close by saying that we all want to see that facility up and running as soon as possible. And there are avenues that are there for this to take place, and we encourage and will assist in any way that we can. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too appreciate the opportunity to have a few minutes to speak about this very serious situation involving Stora Enso and its impact on our economies throughout Cape Breton Island and eastern mainland of Nova Scotia. Certainly affects the 7 eastern counties and I think even beyond into Colchester, Cumberland, Halifax, and probably even beyond that. But certainly for the last 45 years or more, Stora has been a backbone of the economy in the Strait area, but certainly important repercussions throughout many other surrounding counties, and including Pictou County, where I come from. And I have had contact too with a number of my constituents who are very concerned about this issue. They work either directly or indirectly for the pulp company, and and they and their families are being seriously impacted. I can remember back, in fact, back in the 1960s when my father was a contractor for Stora, and also was operated a trucking business. And in fact, I think he had one of the first trucks in Pictou County that hauled to the Strait area. He bought a brand new GMC truck in 1960 and snaked his way down through the old number 4 highway through Pictou and Antigonish counties into across the causeway, which was relatively new at that time, and delivered pulpwood to the plant down there. In fact, it was just 5 years previous to the mill opening in 1955 that the causeway was established that really opened up the opportunity to have a mill that served both the mainland and the Cape Breton Island. And of course, back in those days, forestry was conducted in a far different manner than it is today. I can remember my dad picking up pulpwood from different farmers and woodlot owners, and often they would cut a load or two through the winter months and make $1 to support their families or to pay the taxes on their farm property. And it was a method of forestry that's long since gone, but people would go to the woods maybe with a chainsaw and maybe the horse that worked at other work in the summer months, and snake out a few logs or pulpwood to the roadside, and then the trucker would come and pick it up, and away they go. But of course, things have changed very much in the woodlot industry since those days, and I guess the chainsaw has been replaced with the processor, huge machine that comes in and just takes the whole tree and harvests it and cuts it down and lays it out, and then the horse was replaced by the tree farmer, and then the tree farmer in turn now has been replaced with the huge forwarder that comes and takes it all out the roadside. But a huge difference in the way we do forestry in this province. And so really what we've gone to is from a woodlot where you took a little bit of wood out and maybe you selectively harvest the trees you wanted to cut, to today that we have an industrial forestry model that is so different, and with the rapid pace of change, it's bigger, but is it better? There's the question. It's you can cut an acre down in a day and it's gone, where it might have been all winter somebody worked to do the same amount of wood or same amount of territory that they would work over. But my colleague from Halifax Shabukto had mentioned this as well, that the forestry practices, it's been predicted that we're running into some problems, and basically today we have all our eggs in one basket. We have a huge company that produces pulp and produces newsprint at their super-calendared operation, and but by concentrating into one or two products, the workforce has changed, the mechanization has cut way down on the number of employees that are in our woodlands, and but like I said, bigger is not always necessarily better. And I guess we've got into the industrial forestry model, and that's just clear cut and replant and spray the heck out of any competition that comes along, and then 40 years later you clear cut and replant and spray again. So it's a cycle, but it's unnatural for our woodlots that Nova Scotia has had for thousands of years, where we had a very diversified Acadian forest. It was hardwoods and softwoods, and we had a balance in nature, and it was better for our water table, better for wildlife, better for people. But the model today is so different, and so maybe there's a need to look at not having all our eggs in one basket, but look at diversity again and see if there's a better way to do it. And then if some industry goes down and it's only a part of a diversified forest industry, it's not going to affect the economy so much. So there's real merit in looking at that other model rather than the industrial model that we have at the present time. I've only got a few minutes, Mr. Speaker, but I want to mention that maybe there's a better way of doing forestry that could diversify the economy. But in reality, we don't have that model at this time, and it's something that needs to be worked on. But what we do have is a large employer that is in danger maybe of closing out, and I know other provinces have looked seriously at what they could do to protect their forest industry. In the province of Quebec, I think they spent close to $1 billion, I think, looking at supporting their forest industry. It was $925 million or somewhere in that range that was allocated to prop up and support diversity and support payment plan for purchasing equipment and so on. Similar in New Brunswick, I think they spent over $200 million there to recently to support their forest industry. That you know, with the diversity of things, including a 50% credit on any equipment that was purchased for in the woodlot. And I think Newfoundland too had recently tried to do something there to help their, I think it was the Abitibi mill in Stephenville, and while they were not successful in allowing that plant to continue and to remain there, at least they gave it their best shot. So maybe there is something government can do to look at a package that would help our forest industry. I want to mention briefly, Mr. Speaker, last week I tabled here in the House a petition that was from a number of residents in my county that are very concerned about the Stora impact on our local economy, and it affects a number of you know, it affects everybody in the economy, really. But the operative clause was this: that we, the undersigned, call upon Nova Scotia government to do all within its power to bring about a successful resolution to the current crisis with Stora Enso of the Canso Strait area. And it was signed by 157 contractors and residents and business owners and others that are impacted by this. And there are people from all over Pictou County, that people from Westville and Stullerton and Whitehill, Hopewell, Plymouth, Trafalgar Road, New Glasgow, Woodburn, Sunnybray, Aspen, which is in Guysborough County, Hopewell, on it goes. But they're all people that feel seriously the government's got to put their best effort forward and do something to resolve this issue as quickly as possible. I see here one of the signatures is from Sterling McDonald. Sterling and his wife run a service station in Union Center in Pictou County, and you know, it very much impacts their local business for gasoline and for vehicle repairs. And it's also signed here by Clem and Patricia DeYoung, who are forestry contractors in the Whitehill area. They've just spent somewhere around $300,000 to upgrade their equipment, and the bank is calling on them for payment. So there's a serious impact on our local economy all over. And Mr. Speaker, I guess I call on government to get back, do what they can. If they got one negotiator, maybe they should have 2 or 3 or 4 to try to mediate here to get some solution. Power rates, property taxes, regulations, there's a lot of problems that need to be resolved. But so that's one aspect. And the other side of it is working on diversifying our forest industry so we don't have all our eggs in one basket, and look at more sustainability and returning our forest back to the Acadian forest we should have. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your time, and hopefully there's a resolution real soon. Thank you.
Debate has concluded. We stand adjourned.